country that we are building for the next generation is not the one that I'd like to be giving to my children to inherit.
Reuben, great to catch up with you, mate, and wanted to talk to you today regarding the post that you put up yesterday about civic versus ethno-nationalism, obviously inspired by the great debate that wasn't really a debate this week. I think you wrote a really awesome post kind of identifying what those things are and clearly helping me understand a little bit more about the dynamics of this right-wing movement that's happening. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be here writing that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I'm an engineer and business owner based here in Townsville. We used to live in Canada 6 years ago for 4 years, and since getting back and getting more involved with issues that are going on in the community and realising that things are changing very fast, and the country that we are building for the next generation is not the one that I'd like to be giving to my children to inherit.
What do you think's happening here in Australia, especially with regards to, and your take on the civic versus ethno-nationalism? And I don't think they should be versing each other. I think that they are kind of, well, I'll probably say this wrong and piss off a ton of people anyway, but this is a conversation and a bridge that needs to be built to try and understand these potentially different camps and try and work out a solution here.
Look, I think in Australia there is big business, there is big banks, there is a lot of encouragement to try and keep this housing Ponzi scheme increasing and inflating, get everyone loaded up with as much debt as possible. And it just so happens that there's a lot of Aussies on the lower end of the scale that are being forced out of the housing market completely and ending up homeless in the process. And there just doesn't seem to be enough concern for them, for the actual Australians that are hurting in this hard time. I heard some numbers from a lady who was struggling to find housing in Townsville. She's been struggling for the last few months, effectively living out of her car, and yeah, she was giving in the order of 4,000 just in the Townsville region that were, I believe, on the verge at the very least, but I couldn't back those numbers up.
Yeah, the Townsville having a housing crisis, and I guess living in southeast Queensland in the corner down here, when we drive anywhere here, if you drive past any park near a bridge somewhere where there's a public toilet, you've basically got a camp on the outer edges of Brisbane now, especially heading down towards the Gold Coast and Sunshine Coast. With these type of social problems that we're having here, we've got a generation of kids being raised in cars. If we thought things were troubled for the kids that had already grown up and are looking for jobs, I can only imagine what it's going to be like for this next gen that are coming through out of those circumstances as well. It doesn't give them much hope.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a far cry from the Australian dream of a quarter-acre block and a bit of a yard to grow up to raise a family. That is just a distant memory for the majority of Australians, and it is terrible to see that we've effectively done it to ourselves through allowing poor immigration policies to become the norm.
And those poor immigration policies are basically propping up corporate profits in Australia right now. The big banks, as you said, the real estate industry, all of these hanger-oners industries around that. And then, of course, we've got our own structural issues in the country with things like NDIS that requires bodies. It requires a lot of bodies to look after an aging population. So we're basically a hamster on the treadmill right now, on the wheel, just kind of caught up, trying to run and catch up with ourselves. This argument between civic and ethno-nationalism, though, I heard that framed this week during the debate, but obviously the argument there is that anyone who doesn't agree with ethno-nationalism suddenly falls into the bucket of being a civic nationalist. What's your thoughts on that?
Look, I think that it is a spectrum, and from a purely ethnic nationalist country like Japan, or surprisingly China actually wasn't on the list when I was doing a bit of research, but they are still towards the ethno-nationalist side of the equation. And then you've got on the civic side, and the biggest problem I see with civic across the Western world is pairing civic nationalism with unchecked mass migration. if you keep your immigration policy very tight, you are not going to overrun your native population. And the big number to me is the natural, so births versus deaths. So I believe it's about 200,000 die in Australia each year, and I think it's around the 300,000 are born, something in that kind of order. So I believe it's like 100,000 or so in that kind of number of additional people that are born. If you are bringing in more than that, you are going to end up reducing the native population relative to the overall population over time, and that's just quite basic numbers, So to me, we've got to pull that right back. It's got to be well below that number, and we need to be putting in place policies that encourage people to have larger families in Australia, similar to what Hungary is doing. Really figuring out how to tweak that. And I'm not talking cash handouts. I think that is the complete wrong way to do it. I think tax incentives is a much better method. Splitting income so that the mother and the father are treated equally in terms of how the tax is apportioned to the nuclear family, and then really trying to make it ramp up so that the mothers that are having say 4+ kids, they're really looked after in that position. And then maybe longer term, there's like a massive tax incentive. One idea, I think Hungary's doing it as well, is effectively no tax. If you get to 4 kids as a nuclear family, the mother then doesn't have to pay tax for the rest of her life as a thank you for helping to build the country.
Do you think, and I mean, this is where it gets a little squirrely, I guess, is that the ethno-nationalists, we almost see them, or many of them, start to go, well, we need to deport people that are potentially being naturalised citizens here. There's no doubt at all that we need to pull back on some of the numbers here. There's a lot of visas here that could be wiped out, and the university sector needs an absolute brush through it. I think we all agree on that. But you pull back some of these numbers, if the ethno-nationalists had their way, they'd start to look at people that potentially became citizens in the last, I don't know how long, maybe 5 to 10 years, and then starting to look at deporting some of those people as well. That seems extreme. But I guess from their perspective is that if we shut the gates and when we encourage Australian citizens to have kids, we'd potentially end up with the existing ethnic enclaves that are here having a lot more children than the naturalised Australians anyway. And so we'd potentially have migrants that came from Africa or from Asia that are used to having large families really starting to pump kids out at that point.
So you'd link the benefits to you have to be a citizen for like 10 years, or there has to be some historical. You try and put guardrails in it just to try and encourage the native population that are multi-generational to becoming. There's a few levers we could be pulling. I noticed in Israel they've got I think it's called like a rehoming policy, where basically people from Australians that would be overseas are encouraged to come home, and they basically get first dibs. So let's say you put a nominal cap of, let's say there was 10,000 was the number, 10,000 a year. Australians get the first dib of that 10,000, and when the 10,000's up, that's it. There is no more people that are coming into the country. You have to make sure that there is alignment in terms of what they believe, and to try and make sure that the cultures that you're bringing in are going to really work well with the Australia that all the Australians that are currently living here have built.
Do you think that would make a new civic nationalist policy then, or is this a different spectrum completely from ethno and civic nationalism?
I think it's a we need a winning strategy. We need to find a path that actually gets broad populist support from the general population. If you can find that balance that addresses the issues that have become apparent with the current system, then I think we're onto something. If we go too far on the ethno-nationalist side of the dream. Like in the debate, I'll just there was one comment regarding are Indigenous Australians, are Aboriginals Australian, and there was a comment there that there was on whether or not that was even the case, and there was a lot of Indigenous guys that fought in World War One and World War II, at least World War Two. You'd probably know better than myself, Scott, but we fought hand in hand on the battlefield. So there's been a lot of people that have like earned their right to be Australians over generations, and I think that you trying to paint it as a very narrow nationalistic is just not going. It's not going to get broad support, and it's not going to win. And so if we continue down the path that we're currently on, we're heading for there's no return.
Demographic suicide.
Correct. Correct. So it is something that needs to be done as soon as possible.
It's questionable in my mind that we may not have even gone past that point already, and that the damage is irreparable at this stage. It's possible.
That's right. We are on the tipping point, because there is still a lot of Australians that are effectively demographically suicidal in their beliefs. So you need to try and get the majority on board. Otherwise, it's no turning back. You know.
Yeah. Is it the civic nationalists that got us into this situation? I mean, we know left-wing ideology, and the Uniparty, we can call it the Uniparty, are very aligned with each other. I think we both can agree on that, there's no doubt. But it seems that they're both addicted to the quick hit drug that immigration has become, instead of doing the real work to fix up our economy. I see a lot of this coming back. And this was what frustrates me, is that we're going to argue about identity till the cows come home, but we're not talking about solutions. And I want to win this war. I don't want to just spend the next 5 years identifying who's who in the right-wing zoo. The reality is we've got an army of people here. We just need to all be pushing in the same direction. But at the moment, everyone's just at loggerheads, just kind of hating on each other, and it doesn't seem to achieve anything, which is why we seem to be chasing our tails constantly.
Yeah, correct. We need to come together on a winning strategy. Like, we've all got the same. We know that we can see the problem, and then it's just trying to get to a solution that'll work. And if we don't get to a democratic solution, in 20 years, it's going to get ugly. And the people with the money that do not feel that strongly about it, they will just leave. But I don't know where to at the moment, because there's the potentially it's all Western countries that are collapsing at the same time, demographically collapsing at the same time. So
that data came out a couple of months ago that 180,000 Australian millionaires are expected to leave the country in the next 12 months. You know, that we're in now. And I'll be honest with you, and I've said this to plenty of people, I'm in business. I know a lot of people in business, and almost every single one of them is talking about an exit strategy out of here. And that scares me.
And that should scare us, because that will, similar to what's happening in Victoria, the ones that don't like Victoria leave Victoria and they come up here slightly left-leaning, but maybe not as much, and going, oh man, it was bad down there. And so you end up with Victoria just continually going down the gurgler. So how do you win that battle when the demographics have changed so much that all the ones that were potentially going to help to vote you out of it are gone? So it's not a great place to be in.
No, it's a very tough place to be in. And this is a broken economy. It's a broken economy that has to rely on immigration, like a drug addict has to rely on crack to get through his day. And I don't understand why successive governments haven't taken the initiative to repair and implement tax reform in this country, especially after we did the Henry tax review. Not that that was perfect, but it had suggestions in there that, had they been implemented, we might see ourselves in a completely different position right now. But since 2020, it's just been one fucking after another in Australia, and we just don't seem to be able to get ahead of it. This thing potentially will get worse if we don't see some kind of change in 2028. I don't believe that one nation are completely the solution for us politically here. And while we continue to argue over civic and ethno-nationalism, this huge political void is going to be filled by something.
Yeah, so one thing that's always bugged me is how many homes, for example, politicians have. And in terms of so there's a perverse incentive. They don't want the music to stop, and their entire wealth is linked, like a lot of them are linked to it. So to me, that's a bit of a conflict of interest. If you're trying to actually do the best thing for the country, having that as like an incentive in the background is going to stop you from making these hard decisions that potentially cause the housing market to soften. And that's just not a good place to be in. The other thing that Rennick always brought up, which I think was quite insightful, is the amount of debt that is locked up in the housing market compared to actually active and being able to be used in building businesses and things that actually create wealth. So money that's locked up in housing, that doesn't actually do anything for your country, and it's good for the banks, and our banks are owned by multinational corporations predominantly. So it's good for other countries, not so good for our country. And we've basically created an entire country of tax cattle that you are just trying to load up with debt and milk till the cows come home, proverbially, I suppose.
Tax cattle, that's one of my favorites, mate. The blob is just milking you because you're tax cattle. Yeah. That's what it feels like. You're in business, I'm in business. I know it's a shit fight being in business. It's never been harder, in my opinion. I know there's plenty of industries that are doing quite well at the moment, especially NDIS and care industries. But those of us with our, nose to the grindstone, mate, we're really pushing shit uphill with compliance, regulation, HR, different industrial laws that we have to deal with. It just seems like a myriad of stuff that we're constantly facing. And then we pump in migrants like crazy instead of making it easier for businesses to actually be profitable or do well in this economy, to encourage people to have families. It seems so counterintuitive to me.
Yeah, it's not heading in the right direction. They are just killing the proverbial golden goose. Up here in the north, like with the coal royalty rates. I went and visited a mine last year, and a coal mine, and they were basically tapering down in Queensland. And what do you know? They're actually moving their coal extraction to New South Wales. So if you are making policies that make it unfavourable for your particular state and make it not competitive. You've got not competitive on the state level, and then you've got non-competitive on the international level. Like it is just completely counterproductive to actually building a country. So you are effectively going to kill the golden goose in the process.
Yeah, there's got to be a better way to do it. The royalties thing was a big one. It was the CEO, I think it was BHP, in that interview on Business Insider. It would have been a month or so ago now. He had the CEO of BlueScope on in that episode as well, and they were all talking about the same thing: cost to do business, royalties, and energy costs, literally gutting almost every productive industry in the country right now. I think that people don't notice it, but like, for example, 2 weeks ago in Victoria, 2 huge trucking firms collapsed within 3 days of each other, millions and millions of dollars in debt. The construction industry that I'm in, we are almost on a par with the transport industry for daily collapses, around about 8 to 10 businesses in the country right now. And people go, what do you mean 8 to 10 businesses? Like, yeah, that's actually what's going under every single day.
Yeah, it's a tough market, and we aren't doing ourselves any favor. High energy costs is just a killer. What we should be aiming for as a country, like, I think the policy around energy is just completely wrong. We should be aiming for globally competitive, cheap, reliable energy. And we are so far away from that at the moment. So yes, solar is cheap during the day, but unless you can store it cheaply, you need it round the clock to actually build stuff. And so batteries are just too expensive. Generally, batteries are just too expensive. So you've got to be really thinking through the implications of what you're doing as an entire industry, and the amount of infrastructure that you have to put in for the renewables. Just it is not as easy as they think, because of the it'll only be 15% of nameplate or something along those lines of actually what you're getting. And so over the course of the day. So it's just it doesn't work. You need a lot of base load, and and the act of having more renewables actually make that base load even less productive and less viable.
It seems to me that every single person I talk to, and maybe it's just the echo chamber of people that I surround myself in, we all tend to see the same thing. But even when I'm talking to a random stranger at their house or a building site, it seems like we're all in alignment with this stuff. And I don't understand yet how the main uniparties in Canberra haven't quite picked up on that, but that's because they live in their own bubble as well of disconnect. Just circling back again around this ethno-nationalism stuff, the idea of arguing about identity and the formation of the White Australia policy and the founding fathers of Australia, do you think that's a distraction to the solution?
Yeah, look, I think that discussion was 1970, 1980. Like, we are so far from that now. There's no way you can't, like I've heard you say, you can't put the toothpaste back in the bottle very easily. Where we need to do is get to a winning solution. And the only winning solution is to find that broad, popular policies and force the government to listen by basically saying, look, we've got these 5 or 6 different policies that we are proposing, and we have 65, 70% public support, hundreds of thousands of signatures for each of them. Try and get them up into Parliament in this term, and try and get them to vote on it, and then be able to go, Australians, this is the list of people that are blocking it. The population wants it. You guys are stopping it. Here's all the candidates for this next election who are ready to do business and actually get this done to save Australia. That's where we need to get to.
That's a great solution. I love the idea of that. If we get caught up on the identity and the ethno-politics of this, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. I think, and once again, I come back to the circle of people that I'm in. You're completely separate to me. We've only ever spoken once before. You kind of came to a similar position to me with regards to this, the idea of these different types of nationalism. In the last 24 hours, when I read your ex post and then I sent you a Substack I'd just written, and I almost read word for word, is similar in the where we come to there, especially over the last few days. I think we want to win. I'm talking about the normie brigade here. I think I talk to a lot of normies. You talk to a lot of normies, and it would appear that we kind of seem to be on the same page as them. Do you think the ethno-nationalists were hoping to use MFA as a vehicle to try and sway people towards a higher level of ethno-nationalism?
Look, I think there would definitely be people in there that would be keen for that, but I just don't see I don't see them getting enough support to be able to actually make the changes that need to be done before it's too late. I think we need to try and put the brakes on. It's a big ship. We're trying to turn the ship around. And you need to do it in such a way that actually gets it to turn. If we go too far on the one side, you just won't get enough support to turn it, and we'll still be talking about it. Like, there was a younger gentleman who replied to me, and a very specific, I think it was Australian nationalist gentleman, and his feeling was, we need to get back to, the 1980s. And that is going to be an extremely hard sell now. We can potentially turn the ship and get it going in the right direction and slowly pull it back. But to try and push that, and I suppose the other comment he made is they've been trying for 10 to 20 years and haven't been able to succeed. So to me, that is a sign that it's too far gone to be able to try and even push that way that quickly. We need to try and get it in place so that the demographics that we have now don't get any worse, or don't change any more than they currently are, and put in place policies that maybe try and bring it back slowly. That's what I'd like to see, and that is probably palatable to the majority of the public.
The left-wing chunk of that majority of the public still consider anyone on this side of politics a right-wing extremist, even though the real right-wingers think that we're just soft lefties, which is always a really unusual dynamic here. But once again, this has been a long time coming. The reckoning for these bad decisions, 20, 30 years of bad decisions, are really starting to show their faces now. To be honest with you, I'm surprised we haven't seen another Cronulla riot ever since that happened, mate. I think we've been living on borrowed time ever since. Yep. Why do you think the since the emergence of, I guess, the Brisbane crew having a significant point of difference from the rest of Australia with MFA, why do you think so many people were offended by that more normal outlook on the battlefield that we're currently in, as opposed to the ethno-nationalist view?
You've got competing ideologies. Everyone's trying to wrestle with this. Everyone's trying to get to the solution, and has got a different vision of what that looks like. And so I think it's important to try and galvanise as much of a base as possible, including, you've got the general public, like that. You've got to try and come up with policies. If it's going to happen democratic, that's the only way to go. And so to try and we're all trying to pull in the same direction. We're all trying to get to the same solution, which is not destroy our country. And so everyone's in a different part of their lives, and have got a particular worldview on what they think it should look like. It's just, how do you get to that, or how do you get towards that in that particular direction in a way that's actually going to galvanise enough public support? That's the challenge.
Yeah, it sure is. I think we all can agree on a couple of things, though. Shutting the gates immediately, deporting a whole bunch of temporary visa holders that potentially shouldn't be here, and really starting to limit back and wind this stuff back, and then start to repair this country.
People that are committing violent crimes in Australia that are on a visa, you have got to be joking. How the heck do we have any of those still here? It boggles my mind that someone gets raped or I believe there's been people that have been killed, and they're not gone. Like, that should be effectively revoked, probably serve their jail time, but they should be on the way out. That should not be a forgiven. They're completely unacceptable.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. I'm a big fan of the Singapore model when it comes to this, mate. Is a caning and then a deportation before they go. But yeah, we have a lot of different visas here that are potentially, but have overstayed their welcome. And there's no doubt at all that we should be deporting serious criminals. When the NSN guy, the South African guy that was, what's his name, Matthew Grutters, I think it was, Tony Burke stepped in to have him deported. Obviously, that triggered a lot of people on the right wing, whether they were, far right guys or more left of them. We all saw that and went, shit, that kind of sucks, because that seemed like a pretty petty thing. But that guy wasn't an Australian citizen, and he was participating. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but he was participating in potentially a protest against what's happening in our country here. Did he have the right to protest as a non-Australian citizen?
Look. In terms of the South African political system, he has seen what's happened in their country. He has that worldview. He is trying to ensure that doesn't happen to our country. There was definitely a split. You could see how the mainstream media were painting it as an anti-Semitic protest. Protesting a foreign influence over our government, I don't think is anti-Semitic. Any foreign influence over our government, that shouldn't be really classed as any sort of racial targeting. And then the fact that he was fairly silent, didn't really say anything, and then being targeted for something like that when we've had violent protesters that have been burning Australian flags down south. There just seems to be quite a double standard, and then you go even further than that. So this was someone who was not actually committing a crime. It was a police authorized protest. It was about a lobby, a foreign lobby in our country, potentially having too much influence over our political system. How is that? It just doesn't pass the comparative test, in my opinion, between what they're allowing to occur on the left compared to this gentleman that was on the right. And you could see the divide. There's still, in terms of the public support for having him deported, it is massive. In terms of the mainstream media, the public support is for the deportation, is what it sure looks like, looking at the public sentiment that you're seeing. I think I saw someone did even a poll on should all the NSN that can be deported, and I think it was in the order of like 70 to 80% were in favour of them being deported if they could be. So you've got to be very careful. Like if you're trying to build public support and actually have a winning strategy, you've got to make sure that the public is behind you. Otherwise, you can get quite lonely, and you won't get to the solution that you actually want.
Yeah, it's a heck of a thing. And I mean, obviously they got the headlines. They stayed in the headlines. Stuff like this dragged the story out for a couple of weeks. It's got plenty more legs in it yet. Do you think this is helping push the case for ethno-nationalism in Australia?
I think there will be people that will galvanise behind it, and the more you try and suppress something, this is the whole thing about being the government targeting them. You are going to create that antibody reaction, and you will get some galvanization occurring behind it. To me, if you were actually trying to not inflame the tensions, you wouldn't be trying to turn them into martyrs in the process, and turn them into folk heroes. Like it just seems very counterproductive if you're actually trying to stop it from actually festering.
Yeah, and that makes me wonder about the government's role in this and what they're hoping to achieve out of it as well. Demonising anyone on the right wing obviously seems to be part of that.
Yeah, and so they've given the public a villain per se for the public to then pile on against, and will that actually work against trying to stop mass immigration? We'll see. Like at the end of the day, we need to try and get majority support, and if you've got 70 or 80% of the people piling on the NSN, they're not going to be able to politically turn that ship around in the time frame that they think that I would suggest that we'd need to do.
Which kind of puts Australians in a tough spot in 2028 if there's no viable political solution on the ballot other than the White Australia Party.
Yeah. So ideally, I think we need to put pressure on the existing system, and try and draw a line, try and be able to get enough of the public on board that we want to see change. This is what we're proposing. The Liberals are very weak. Like there is not much daylight between Labor and Liberals. So I just don't see how people can think that is the solution to it. Like, you've got the difference between running into the wall quickly or running into the wall in a few more years. Like it just doesn't really pass the test to me. You need to get the immigration rate well below the birth replacement rate for Australia.
Yeah. The Liberal Party, obviously, I was a member up until about 6 months ago when I got kicked out. But I mean, I joined the Liberal Party in 22 with the naive idea that I'd be able to potentially push some change internally in the party to try and get some of these issues addressed. My main reason for joining was because I wanted COVID accountability, but I don't believe that we've had in this country yet.
No.
But I don't think we're ever going to get that while the Uniparty is still in charge. But trying to push these issues in that party didn't seem to get anywhere. I know there's people out there that are still like, oh, join the Liberal Party, we can change it from the inside, we can change it from the inside. I'm not optimistic that that's ever going to be a viable solution prior to 28, although I'm not discouraging anyone from joining a political party. I think if you can and you're interested, you should definitely join. I don't care where you join. I think you need to be involved. I think you need to open your eyes. With that in mind, when I look at the ethno-nationalists and I look at the extreme right wing, or what they call the far right, I see a bunch of young people. I don't see a lot of elder statesmen or older people in that movement. Why do you think that is?
Look, they are angry. They have been thrown aside. They do not see a future. And so they're galvanizing around an idea to turn things around. There's a brotherhood. There's a, there is a group of young men that could, in theory, change the world if there was enough of them. You've got that divide with the people that are the older demographic. They have been able to build their businesses. They've been able to build up wealth, and so there's a little bit more insulation there. Whereas the younger demographic have been locked out of the now property market. They do not see a future. I listened to a few interviews with some of the NSN gentlemen, and they've been targeted for many years before they became the NSN for their particular views around jobs and opportunities. And so the more you oppress a people, the more they're going to end up trying to fight back. And that divide you're seeing is really around, I think, class or wealth, or they've seen a different. They see no future, whereas the people here still got an all right life, but if you're awake, you would realise that the music's going to stop soon, and there's no coming back.
Do you think that means that on that side of the fence, that they will be unwilling to ever find a compromise to try and find a workable winning position here?
I'm optimistic that with enough discussion and enough that we can change minds. That's what the whole game is: changing minds and hearts to bring about a collective movement to try and get to the right solution. The oppression that they're feeling and the attacks that they've been under over many years has led them to their particular worldview. Is it possible that if we get, so let's say, for example, we shut the gates, we were able to turn things around, birth rates were going up for Australians, the demographics had stabilised and were actually improving in the right direction, it would take the wind out of the sails of the young people. Would be like, oh, we've actually got houses that are affordable again. We can see a future. I think that would help to alleviate the pull that people are finding to that particular ideology.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that it would help. But I just want to throw this one at you there, Reuben, and to think about. What I'm also identifying here is some of these guys, some of the leading influencers on that side of the fence don't need the money. They come from money. And so for them, it's not a financial issue or an economic issue. I mean, I can question whether their hearts are truly patriotic or not, but it's just an observation in my mind that that's an interesting dynamic that's committed to a white Australia as opposed to an economically prosperous Australia.
Look, I think they are still... And yeah, look, we'd have to have discussions to really understand hearts and minds on where they're at. But it is that feeling that Australia is going to collapse, which I would agree. It is 20, 30 years down the track. Our kids will be living that. They're young. They're seeing that too. They've woken up early, and they're like, "Whoa, we need drastic change." And so the act pulling that Overton window it definitely counts for something, definitely galvanizing the youth. You know, we saw in Mexico the overthrow of, I'm not sure exactly where that's at, but what was it, last week? It was the youth. It was the Mexican youth that were just, no, it is on. And I don't know how many thousand youth were there, but tens, hundreds of thousands, I don't know, big numbers. And so there is a lot of youth have changed a lot of directions of countries. So I definitely wouldn't discount them. I definitely wouldn't think that there is no risk of that occurring. So I think it's extremely important that if we want a democratic, non-violent correction, it needs to be through putting pressure on the federal government and finding that bipartisan majority. You got to get the majority, the populace on board, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Which is, why I find it a little challenging to be, I don't know, I guess there's elements that want to see us pushed out of this debate or out of the fight, that we're not relevant, that we just want to settle for a compromise that allows the status quo to continue with some minor tweaking around the edges. I don't know about you. I'm very confident about you. I shouldn't have said it that way.
Yeah.
But your opinion seems very aligned with mine, that we want drastic action and we want
change.
action
Yeah.
now. There is no compromise on that element of it. I guess I'll look a little deeper and go, well, what's the economics look like? How do we make sure we can pay the bills after that as well, you know?
Yeah. So I think it needs to be done carefully, and we need to do modelling and make sure that it's going to work correctly. But there's still a lot of levers I think that can be pulled to actually turn it around. Well, like Australia, even outside of this kind of Ponzi scheme that's been created, during the last state election, one of the things that came apparent to me was the economic complexity index. We've been running our country into the ground over the course of 30 to 40 years, and we're now down at, like, I'm going to say I think it's around the 93 with Uganda. How on earth, I think we're in the 50s, like 30, 40 years ago. And that economic complexity index, like it is how many complicated things are you making in Australia? That would be probably the simplest. Or are you just a hole in the ground? We are turning into just a big quarry for the world. And we need to get back to actually building ththings in this country. And that will create opportunity. The other things that Jared Rennick, I've got a lot of respect for the stuff that I've heard from him. The idea of an infrastructure bank, making sure that we're actually investing, getting control of our wealth again, getting control of building things that will create wealth for this country. So we need to hit it on multiple avenues, but we need to, unless we're looking at demographic suicide as a country, we need to basically pull it right back and try and start rebuilding that Australian identity here.
Yeah, I think that's the identity that we need to be grabbing onto, mate. Look, I'm always going to struggle with deporting people that are already citizens here. I just can't drive with it. I find it distasteful, and I don't know how we're going to get around that problem. I think that's going to be a major sticking point. But I do believe that we can breed enough to solve our own problems here, and then we become the largest demographic by nature anyway.
That's right.
At potentially a 90-95% rate over time, and with a whole bunch of people that have integrated into our society, like those, the Italians and Greeks that came after the Second World War. I don't discount them as great contributors to this country. And I'm also, because of my age, I remember, in the 90s on construction sites in WA, when all the Bosnians and the Serbs came over from the Balkans War, over there, and mate, those guys were on opposing sides, but suddenly they're on a building site in Perth pouring concrete, good as gold, no problems at all, left their shit behind them. And that was when we brought guys in to actually work in our construction industry. We don't even bring anyone in to work in the construction industry anymore, mate. It's a shit fight, right? So who are we bringing in? Because we brought in people that wanted to assimilate and wanted to work here previously. We don't do that now. And
that's the key. Like wanting to assimilate, wanting Australia to be your number one country long term, not trying to create a ethnic enclave and actually, making a mini your country that you came from. in Australia. Like we need to be coming together in unity around an Australian identity. And if you're not on board with that, like that doesn't work long term. And look, a small portion over time, just from the act of intermarriage, like it may not be their parents, but the kids, there may be a bit of intermarriage that occurs, and over time, it would get you know, it would get watered down, and you'd galvanise on that Australian identity, like happened with the Italians and stuff inside that arrangement. But one really good book that I would suggest people read would be Clash of Civilizations. That shows what happens when a minority becomes a majority, and what will happen to Australia if we don't get our act together.
Sorry about that, mate. I'm not sure who cut out who.
Yeah, no, you're right.
I was going to say that we're on an interesting trajectory towards something. This is, as you said rightly before, in my opinion, we're surrounded by tax cattle. We are tax cattle because this is in many ways what I would describe as a human farm. And a great farm can manage the livestock. I don't want to be considered livestock, but we can manage what happens on this property, this great island property of ours, Australia. And we can adjust the demographics here. We have the power to do it. It's just a matter of having the will.
Yeah, and like the Australian identity that our forefathers fought for to maintain, that should be treasured. I think they would be just horrified with their great grandchildren effectively becoming a minority in their own country. Like that should not be on the cards. But if our current government, our both major parties, keep doing what they're doing, that's where we're heading in 20 to 30 years. So like we need drastic change, and if people are unsure about what the future could look like, just look at history. Have a look at the book Clash of Civilizations. When you see massive civilizational competition that occurs, and when a minority becomes a majority and pushes out the minority, or there ends up becoming a civil war, there is lots of examples of civilizational collapse occurring from drastic demographic change quickly. It should do not underestimate what demographics can do to a country.
Yeah, absolutely. We all agree on that. I do believe. I want to see the ethno nationalists and the civic nationalists and those of us that I consider to be in between that, the Australia First patriots. I think that's a great way to describe us. I do agree that the Civ Nats kind of got us to this position, aligned with the Uniparty. I think the ethnos have a great point to make about how they want to see their country, and we can't dismiss their beliefs and their concerns. How do you think we fit their thoughts into what it looks like next for us, mate? Should there be some consideration for compensating them in a different way, or giving them more play in the game?
We've got a representative democracy. Anyone can become a representative if you can get enough support for your particular brand of thought, and become part of the conversation. You can also just advocate for your beliefs with the representatives that you can, and the general populace. And when there is enough people that agree with you, you will be able to push the envelope further. But from what I've seen of if you have a look at where the current legislation is at, it is you're threading a needle between all the different existing legislation to get us to a point, and there's landmines everywhere. So we need to try and make sure that you get that broad popular support to actually turn the ship. And I think what they're aiming for, what they're concerned about, is the Australian heritage that our grandparents and our great grandparents were living with, and so they want to ensure that doesn't get lost. And I do not think that we should be dismissing that concern, because I want to see that heritage maintained as well. I think the British Australia community has been probably the strongest voice that I've seen online, and is able to have those conversations well in the public sphere, and be able to have those voices heard, and at least advocate for our historical our families, our ancestry, and ensure that is actually to stop through the schools, like, of this constant attack on the kids, that this is your stolen land, this is not your land. That needs to stop. We need to come together as Australians and ensure that our nation has a stable future.
Yeah, I look at a lot of these guys on the right, these young guys, and I look at them and I see, not in a bad way, but a generation that have been raised around identity, the identity soup, I call it, and they've just been constantly bombarded with people talking about identity. What are you? What category are you? Where do you pigeonhole into this? And it's hardly surprising to me that they've completely pushed back against the woke ideology thing, but then gone for a different form of identity when it comes to the identity politics part of it. And I'm not dismissing their claim. Like, our in-group bias says that we all want to be surrounded by people that are similar to us, and have the same traits as us, potentially even look like us from a skin perspective. That's a part of our DNA that's ingrown into us. I think when you jam different cultures in together, you get a soup, and it's not necessarily a good tasting soup, because at the moment this soup tastes like shit. And if my granddad saw this place today, he died 20 years ago, he'd be horrified, mate, at what's going on here. And he was a veteran as well. And so I think your granddad would probably be the same, mate. So what do we do next?
Yeah, and what do we want our country to look like, for our kids and our grandkids? And I would prefer that we stand up now, when we can do it, when we can create change peacefully, because what our kids will be facing won't be peaceful if they continue on this way, and it'll be ugly. And I think it is our duty to do what we can to try and turn the tide now.
There's that saying that those that make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. Have you heard that one before? Yeah.
And the one, weak men, hard men create good times create weak men, weak men create bad times.
The cycle goes around and round. There's another one, it's an old African one that I heard, that if you don't give the young guys a seat at the fire, they'll burn the village down for heat. And so there's these great proverbs and stories from the past that are human truths. We know that they're ancestral truths that we've been raised on, the way humans have evolved in this world, in this country.
And look, ensuring that we're humble and that we listen to the concerns that are raised. So, like, the young guys that are feeling lost and are feeling and they've clung onto a particular ideology, trying to show them a path forward and hope for the future, that they can actually have a future in Australia and for their grandkids, and see that actually playing out. I think that will solve a lot of the issues and bring the majority on board again.
Great conversation, Reuben. Where can people find you, mate, if they want to follow your socials?
So on X, Rubes Richardson, and then I suppose all socials. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. X is I suppose one of the best ones for having discussions on ideas, I'd say. Whereas the others are definitely, it feels a lot more limited, in my opinion.
I'll chuck Reuben's socials links in the description on this video. But yeah, listen, Reuben, great conversation. And thanks so much for the short notice to do this today. I think it was a great
you're welcome.
moment. We were both thinking kind of aligned, and it was a good time to unpack that a little.
Yeah, good luck with everything, Scott. Yeah, I just hope that as an overarching community of patriots, the civic nationalists, the ethno-nationalists, that we can all come together and turn this ship around before it's too late. And I think that people need to understand the urgency and we've only got there's a few elections that you could do to turn it around before the numbers, the demographics will just be working completely against you, and there'll be no hope.
One final question, mate. Just a quick one. Would you ban foreign lobbying in Australia?
Yes, I think that needs to go. Like that it should not be happening in Australia.
Shouldn't even be a thing, should it? No.
Yeah, and as we've seen in America, the amount of foreign lobbying that goes on in America, the impact on that entire political system on the West, yeah, we need to ensure that our politicians are looking out for Australians' best interests, pretty much only. Like that should be their goal. They should not be pandering to other countries, and we should be ensuring that is occurring in our country.
Good on you, Reuben. Great talking, mate.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.